I spent the last few weeks talking to some of my wealthiest friends in America. Some built businesses, some made their money through real estate. Others turned ordinary industries into fortunes. But I wasn't interested in their cars, homes, or how much money they had. I wanted to know something else. How did they actually get this rich? So I decided to ask them. I visited their homes, walked through their businesses, and sat down with them in places most people only see from the outside. I asked each of them a simple question. If you had to build your wealth all over again, what would you do? I expected completely different answers. And at first, that's exactly what I got. One talked about business, another talked about real estate. Another told me the biggest mistake people make has almost nothing to do with money. But the more people I spoke with, the more I noticed something strange. They had made their fortunes in completely different ways, but underneath it all, they were following many of the same rules. By the time I finished my last conversation, I realized something about wealth I hadn't understood before. But to explain it, I need to take you back to my first conversation. It started when I visited one of my wealthiest friends at his home. I knew he was successful, but he rarely talked about money. When I arrived, I was surprised by how normal everything felt. Yes, he had a beautiful home, but there was no desperate attempt to prove he was wealthy. We sat down, and I asked how he had built his fortune. His answer was less exciting than I expected. He had spent years building a company in an industry most people would consider boring. He didn't invent revolutionary technology. He didn't become rich overnight. He simply found one business he understood and became extremely good at it. In the beginning, his company was small. Then he hired more people, improved his systems, listened to customers, and kept growing. He told me one of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make is waiting until their company grows before preparing for growth. His approach was different. He built the company today for the size he wanted it to become tomorrow. Then he told me something even more interesting. Even during years when his business was making millions, he lived far below what he could afford. Instead of taking the profits and upgrading his lifestyle, he put much of the money back into the company. More employees, better systems, more growth. He said many people do the opposite. They make more money and immediately buy a better car, a bigger house, and more expensive vacations. Their income grows, but their lifestyle grows just as quickly. He told me, if you want to build something big, you have to give your money time to work. That stayed with me. People see the successful company and the wealth. They don't see the years when that person could have spent the money but chose to reinvest it. Before I left, I asked what kept him motivated after making more money than he needed. He told me money was never the real goal. He wanted to improve and become better at what he did. That was my first lesson. Some wealthy people aren't obsessed with looking rich. They're obsessed with becoming better at something valuable. A few days later, I met another wealthy friend at a hotel. His story was completely different. He had spent years building businesses and had a reputation for moving incredibly fast. As we sat in the lobby, his phone kept receiving messages. Instead of letting important decisions wait, he handled them and moved on. I asked him why. He told me many successful people have a strong sense of urgency. They don't rush important decisions, but they don't allow simple problems to sit around for days. Solve the problem, make the decision, move forward. He believed speed created momentum, and momentum created opportunities. Then we talked about time. When he was younger, he thought money was his most valuable resource. As he became wealthier, he realized he was wrong. Time was more valuable. Money could be lost and earned again, but an hour that disappeared was gone forever. He became careful about what deserved his attention. He focused on his family, businesses, and the things that mattered most. That conversation made me think about how many hours we lose every week, scrolling, waiting, being busy without being productive. Maybe one advantage wealthy people have isn't simply more money. Maybe they're better at protecting their time. My next conversation took me somewhere completely different. I met another friend near the marina and spent the afternoon with him on his boat. He had made most of his money through investing and business ownership. I asked what financial mistake he saw most often. His answer was simple: trying to look wealthy before actually becoming wealthy. He had watched people earn serious money and immediately change everything. New car, new watch, bigger apartment, expensive trips. Their income increased, but instead of building assets, they built an image. He said real wealth often grows quietly. In his early years, he focused on owning things that could produce value: businesses, investments, assets, things that could grow while he slept. He wasn't against enjoying money, But there is a difference between enjoying wealth and spending everything trying to appear wealthy. Then he said something I remembered. People want the lifestyle first and the assets second. I did it the other way around. Build the assets first, let them grow, then allow the lifestyle to follow. I was starting to see the pattern. My first friend reinvested in his company. My second protected his time. My third built assets before upgrading his lifestyle. Different people, different industries, but the same idea. Delay the reward today to create more options tomorrow. But I still wanted to understand how someone could start without already having money. So my next stop was a friend who built most of his wealth through real estate. I met him at one of his properties. As we walked around, I asked how someone goes from owning nothing to controlling a large real estate portfolio. He laughed and told me the answer was boring, one property at a time. His first deal wasn't impressive. It didn't make him rich, but it taught him how the system worked. Then he bought another and another. Over time, his knowledge and relationships grew. Eventually, the deals became bigger too. But he told me the most valuable thing he built wasn't his property portfolio, it was his network. He said, "Your circle can eventually become more valuable than your paycheck." When he was younger, he searched for people who knew things he didn't. Instead of pretending to have the answers, he asked questions. He found experienced people and learned from them. I asked how someone with no money or connections could build relationships with successful people. His answer was simple. Ask. Most people never do. Find someone who has accomplished what you want to accomplish. Approach them respectfully. Ask a thoughtful question. Offer to buy them coffee. Don't ask them to make you rich. Ask them to help you understand. Not everyone will say yes, but a few good relationships can change the direction of your life. Then we talked about real estate. He explained that his thinking changed when he understood the difference between working for money and owning assets that could produce money. He learned how banks, financing, and capital worked. But he was clear about something. Borrowing money isn't automatically smart. Debt can help build wealth when carefully used for productive assets, but it can destroy someone who doesn't understand the risk. The real advantage wasn't debt itself, it was financial knowledge, understanding the numbers, understanding cash flow, understanding risk. As I left the property, I realized something else. The wealthiest people I had spoken with weren't necessarily doing more things. They often did fewer things for much longer. One business, one skill, one investment strategy. Then they kept improving. My final conversation happened a few days later. I met another successful friend for dinner. By this point, I had heard about business, real estate, investing, time, mentors, and reinvesting. But I had one final question. What skill had made the biggest difference in his financial life? I expected him to say investing. Instead, he said communication. More specifically, learning how to sell. At first, I thought he meant selling products. But he explained that selling was much bigger. When you apply for a job, you're selling your abilities. When you negotiate your salary, you're selling your value. When you start a company, you're selling your idea. When you hire talented people, you're selling your vision. And when you raise money, you need to explain why someone should believe in what you're building. He told me many people avoid opportunities because they're terrified of rejection. They hear no once and stop. Successful people hear no too. They simply don't treat rejection as the end. They adjust, they improve, they try again. That was the final piece I needed. When I started these conversations, I thought I would discover a hidden investment, a secret business, or a financial shortcut wealthy people knew. But that's not what happened. I discovered something simpler. My wealthy friends built their fortunes in completely different ways. One built a company, another invested, another focused on real estate. Their paths looked nothing alike, but their behavior was surprisingly similar. They lived below their means while building. They reinvested instead of immediately upgrading their lifestyles. They protected their time. They moved when opportunities appeared. They built assets. They learned from people ahead of them. They accepted rejection as part of the process. And most importantly, they stayed focused long enough for their efforts to compound. That's the part we rarely see. We see the wealthy person after 20 years. We don't see year one. We see the successful company. We don't see the tiny office where it started. We see the real estate portfolio. We don't see the first small property. We see the boat. We don't see the years when buying that boat would have been a terrible financial decision. And maybe that's the real secret. Most people want the visible rewards of wealth, but people who build wealth spend years focusing on the invisible part first: the skills, the discipline, the relationships, the assets, the knowledge, the patience. So, after talking with all of them, I asked myself the same question I had at the beginning. How did they get so rich? There wasn't one answer. There wasn't one perfect investment. There wasn't one secret business. They made decisions today that gave them more options tomorrow. Then they repeated those decisions for years. And if there was one lesson I took away from these conversations, it was this: don't focus on looking wealthy. Focus on becoming valuable. Build skills, build assets, build relationships, protect your time, and give those things enough time to compound. Because the path to wealth may be different for everyone, but the principles behind lasting wealth are often much more similar than we think.